The cake costs $384. Maya Ellis has $391. All of it sits in a glass jar at the bottom of a cloth bag. After paying for the cake, she will have only $7 left. Not enough to fix her worn-out shoes. Not enough for a decent dinner, but still enough for more than 2 bus rides, taking her from home to work. Maya knew exactly what every dollar in that jar could do. And yet, that afternoon, she walked through the glass doors of Grant and Bloom and headed straight for the largest cake in the store. She wanted this to be the very first time her mother's name appeared at the center of a cake, because Ruth had spent her entire life caring for others, making sacrifices, and baking cakes for everyone around her. But not once had she ever received a cake that truly belonged to her. What Maya didn't know was that the billionaire who owned the store was standing just behind her, quietly watching the jar of coins in her hands. And what happened next would lead him back to the woman he had been searching for more than 30 years. Before we continue this deeply moving journey, if you also believe that every act of genuine kindness, no matter how small, deserves to be cherished and will one day find its way back, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Together, let's share inspiring stories like this with even more people. Maya did not stop in front of the trays of cake covered with icing shiny as a mirror. Did not look at the boxes of chocolate arranged under the yellow light or the ribbons priced higher than the shirt she was wearing. She had just left the insurance office after nearly 8 hours of data entry. On her wrist, still the mark left by the employee badge lanyard. In 3 more hours, she had to be at the pharmacy for the evening shift. The time in between was just enough to buy the cake, catch 2 buses, and get home before her mother grew suspicious. Maya stood in front of the central glass case. The ivory-colored cake had 3 low tiers, edged with small sugar flower petals and a yellow decorative band running around the base of the cake. It was not the most beautiful cake she had ever seen. It was the first cake that made her think her mother's name could be placed in the middle of something, instead of lying at the end of a list of people who had sacrificed. "This one," she said. "Please write for me. Happy birthday, Mother Ruth. The first time just for Mother." Tessa, the young girl standing behind the counter, looked at the price sign, then looked back at Maya. That gaze lasted only a beat, but Maya had lived long enough to recognize the moment when someone else begins calculating on your behalf. Tessa did not smile, nor did she say anything rude. She simply mentioned that the cake cost $384 in a voice softer than usual, as if trying to keep a stranger from embarrassing herself. Maya nodded. She had looked at that number on the website for 5 weeks straight. There were nights coming home near 10 o'clock. She sat on the edge of the bed, opened her phone, and zoomed in on the picture of the cake until the sugar flower petals broke apart into small squares. She read the price many times to remember how many shifts she still lacked, how many lunches she had to bring from home, and how many times she needed to walk 3 extra blocks instead of transferring buses. The shift manager walked over when she heard Tessa call. Simone Parker wore a black shirt, hair tied neatly, and held a tablet containing the order list. She apologized before explaining that the cake was being held for a pre-order whose payment had not yet been completed. If that other customer confirmed within 30 minutes, the store would be obligated to hand over the cake. Simone suggested Maya choose the smaller kind on the left shelf, a cake enough for 6 people and one that could have the name written on it right away. Maya looked at the small cake. It was pretty, tidy, and reasonable. It was the kind of thing people usually advise someone like her to choose. Just enough, not too costly, not drawing attention. But her mother had lived 62 years on just enough portions. Just enough food after giving the better share to husband and children. Just enough money to keep the lights on. Just enough strength to stand in the church kitchen for 1 more hour because there was still one family arriving late who had not yet received their meal. "Could you wait for the other order to be confirmed?" Maya asked. Simone looked at the clock. Behind her, the receipt printer kept pushing out strips of white paper. The store operated at a pace that did not leave much room for long stories. Simone said they could wait 10 minutes, but still advised Maya to choose another option to avoid being late. Maya placed her hand on the strap of the bag that had been mended with blue thread. That stitch was sewn by Ruth one winter evening, when she was still well enough to sit for a long time by the window. Ruth used to hold the bag on her lap, threading the needle slower than before, but still refusing to let her daughter buy a new one. She said an object still usable should not yet be thrown away. Maya had thought that sentence was only about the bag until she caught her mother standing alone in the kitchen, holding onto the counter and waiting for a wave of exhaustion to pass before turning back to finish washing the last 2 cups. "Today is my mother's birthday," Maya said. "She has made cakes for almost every child in the neighborhood, but no one has ever made a cake just for her." Tessa stopped folding the box. Simone also stopped looking at the tablet for a few seconds. Maya did not add that Ruth had never had candles matching her actual age, did not mention the cornmeal cake she made herself at 40 years old, then called it the whole family's dessert so no one would realize she was celebrating her own birthday. There are things that, if spoken too plainly, would sound like begging. Simone softened her voice, but the procedure was still there. She said the store needed to confirm the payment method before holding the cake. Tessa unconsciously glanced toward the card reader. Just a small movement. Not malicious. But it made Maya remember all the time she had to prove she had the right to stand where she was standing. She unzipped the bag. Inside was a box of candles bearing the number 62, a wooden spoon with a crescent-shaped burn mark, and the glass jar wrapped in a kitchen towel. Maya lifted it out with both hands. The $1 bills were folded into quarters. The $5 bills were pressed against the sides of the jar. The quarters, dimes, and nickels filled the remaining gaps. She set the jar down on the glass surface. The sound it made was not loud, just a dry, heavy clink. But Tessa held her breath for a beat. Simone lowered the tablet, and the man who had just walked through the door behind Maya stood still upon seeing the coins settling inside the glass. That man did not yet know the jar had begun with a $1 bill at 6:12 in the morning, 5 months earlier. That day, Maya stood in the small kitchen in North Philadelphia, hand holding the refrigerator door that trembled slightly from the old motor. Inside, there was only a carton of eggs, half a jug of milk, 2 servings of soup Ruth had cooked over the weekend, and rows of medicine bottles lined up on the door shelf. The $1 bill sat in her jacket pocket, change left over from buying bread. Maya had meant to save it for the weekend bus fare, but then she saw her mother had fallen asleep in the chair with the recipe notebook open on her lap. The page in front of Ruth listed the names of 6 children in the neighborhood along with the kind of cake each liked. Chocolate for Jamal, vanilla with strawberry for Keisha, carrot cake without nuts for Mr. Lewis in the house at the end of the row. There was no line for Ruth. Maya took a jar that had once held tomato sauce, washed clean the night before, and dropped the bill into it. It lay alone at the bottom of the glass, so light that when she lifted the jar, she almost felt nothing. She wrote 2 words on the lid in black marker: Mother's birthday. From then on, every coin that went into the jar had to be taken from somewhere else. Maya worked in the claims processing department of an insurance company from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. The job was not heavy in a way people could see, but it wore down her focus little by little. She checked medical record codes, treatment dates, missing signatures, and figures where even a small discrepancy could get a file sent back. 3 evenings a week, she traded her shirt for a pharmacy uniform, then stood for nearly 5 more hours under white light, entering orders, packing medicine bags, and showing elderly customers how to read print too small on the labels. She did not live in an empty house. Ruth had a bed. Maya had a bed. The kitchen still had food, and the living room had an old but clean sofa. What made their life difficult was that everything existed right at the edge of breaking down. The heater still ran, but sometimes made a knocking sound. Daniel's car had been sold years ago. The oven only heated evenly if a brick was propped under its left leg. Everything was still usable, as long as 2 things did not break in the same month. According to the July 1, 2025 estimate, Philadelphia had 1,574,281 people. Data from 2020 to 2024 shows 21.4% of the city's residents live below the poverty line. Maya did not remember those figures every morning. She only knew that in a city of over 1.5 million people, there were still kitchens where an $80 bill could change an entire month's menu. She commuted by SEPTA. 1 bus or metro ride cost $2.90. The SEPTA key card allowed her to transfer free up to 2 times within 2 hours, so Maya knew by heart every interval between trips. Being 6 minutes late could make her wait an extra 20 minutes. Forgetting to reload the card could turn a carefully budgeted day into a day short on money. Those small numbers never appeared in birthday photos, but they decided who arrived on time and who had to call and apologize. Maya started bringing lunch from home. She stopped buying coffee at the stand below the office, even though the seller had memorized how she took it. On evening shifts, She walked 3 blocks from the bus stop to the pharmacy instead of transferring. Each time she avoided an expense, she folded the money, put it into the jar, then wrote the date on a slip of paper stuck beside it. Ruth discovered it at the end of the second month. She picked up the jar, heard the coins clink against each other, and asked Maya what she was saving for. At the time, the heating system had just made a small popping sound in the night, so Maya said it was money for repairs. Ruth nodded right away. The lie was accepted easily because it was built on a real worry. That night, Maya lay in bed and heard her mother coughing in the next room. She knew the heater could break. She knew an unexpected appointment could also make the money disappear. But she kept putting money into the jar, because some promises, if postponed until life became completely stable, would never have a day to begin. The third $5 bill came from covering a Sunday evening shift. The next $12 was what she received for helping a coworker fix a rejected file. A handful of quarters was money Ruth had given her to buy laundry detergent, but the store was having a sale. Maya paid back the exact amount shown on the receipt, then kept the difference in her pocket until late at night, as if afraid she would spend it if she touched it too soon. By the 4th month, the jar was so heavy Maya had to use both hands to lift it down from the shelf. Ruth still believed it was money for fixing the heating system. Once she stood in the kitchen, watched Maya count the money, then said that if it was not enough yet, Maya could just use the small savings in her envelope. Maya did not turn around. She simply said she was almost there. Now, under the lights of Grant and Bloom, Simone looked at the bills pressed against the sides of the jar and realized there are people who do not carry money in a wallet because the wallet has no room for what they had to give up to get it. Tessa reached toward the lid of the jar, but before her fingers touched the metal, the man standing behind Maya took another step toward the counter. He wore a charcoal-colored coat, no tie, holding a cup of coffee more than half gone cold. No one in the store managed to greet him, but Simone recognized him almost instantly. She set the tablet down, her back straightening by the reflex of someone who has just seen the owner walk in right as a seemingly small procedure risked becoming something no procedure could explain. Malcolm Grant did not look at Simone first. He looked at the jar. Through the glass, the bills were pressed against each other, the paper edges softened from being folded and unfolded many times. A few quarters were caught between the $5 bills. On the lid of the jar, there was still a trace of black ink, now faded, only part of the word birthday legible. Malcolm had walked past thousands of checkout counters in the food and hotel system spanning many states bearing his name, but he had never seen a sum of money brought in with such care. "What's going on?" he asked. The question was short, the tone ordinary. Not loud enough to make customers turn around out of curiosity, but enough to slow every movement behind the counter. Simone explained about the unpaid pre-order, the confirmation deadline, and the alternative she had offered. She did not hide the fact that she had asked to check the payment method first. The more she spoke, the more clearly she heard the mechanical quality in the very words she had used just minutes earlier. Malcolm turned to Maya. He did not ask whether she had enough money. He only asked what she wanted the store to do. Maya placed a hand on the lid of the jar. That gesture was not to protect the money from being taken away. It was like someone placing a hand on the shoulder of someone who had walked with them for too long. "I want to buy the cake," she said. "If the other order hasn't been paid yet, I can wait. If you need to count the money, go ahead and count it." After that sentence, she fell silent. She did not mention her 2 jobs. She did not speak of the lunches she had skipped or the evenings Ruth fell asleep before she got home. Maya did not want to turn her love for her mother into evidence for being served. She only wanted her money to be treated like anyone else's money. Tessa pulled a clean metal tray from under the counter, spread 2 sheets of cake liner paper over it, then opened the lid of the jar. A faint smell of metal and old paper escaped, mixing with the scent of butter, vanilla, and warm sugar in the store. She poured it out very slowly. The coins rolled into small circles, then stopped at the edge of the tray. The bills still held their square folds, as if every time Maya put them in, she had wanted them to take up as little space as possible. Tessa started with the bills. She unfolded them one at a time, smoothed them flat with her palm, then arranged them by denomination. Simone stood beside her, not rushing her. Malcolm set his coffee cup down on the counter. Behind them, the receipt printer kept running, but no one heard that sound as clearly as the sound of the coins touching each other. A woman waiting to pick up a birthday cake for her son gently pulled her child closer to her as he tried to step forward. A man in a delivery uniform looked at his watch, then put his phone back in his pocket instead of leaving. No one knew why Maya had brought money in a jar. But there are scenes that do not need to be fully explained for people to understand that they should stand still. Tessa finished counting the bills, moved on to the quarters, dimes and nickels. She used her fingertips to separate each group, her lips moving along with the numbers. Twice she stopped to check again. Maya watched the young girl's hands move through the money she had saved for 5 months and remembered exactly where some of those coins had come from. 1 quarter was change from the vending machine at the office. 3 $1 bills came from the evening she walked in the rain instead of calling a ride for the last stretch. The $10 bill near the bottom of the jar was money Ruth had given her to buy new socks. Maya had bought a cheaper pair, then hidden the difference before her mother noticed the small tear at the heel. Tessa added it up one last time on the small calculator. She looked at the screen, checked the stacks of money again, then looked up. $391. The cake cost $384. The $7 left sat on the tray as 1 $5 bill, 1 $1 bill, and 4 quarters. To the store, that was a smaller amount than the price of a box of butter cookies. To Maya, it was more than 2 bus or metro rides at $2.90 each. It could get her to work the next morning and leave a little left over to reload her card. Simone looked at the $7, then looked at Maya's soft shoes worn thin at the heel. She apologized, adding no further excuse. The apology came late, but it was not false. Maya nodded once. She only wanted the cake boxed before Ruth started wondering why her daughter was coming home late. Malcolm looked at the piece of paper with the dedication written on it, placed beside the jar. He read the line twice, then said the store would finish the cake right away. He also said the money would be fully refunded because today's cake was a gift from Grant and Bloom. Maya closed her fingers around the lid of the jar. She shook her head. Not because she failed to understand the good intention behind that offer. Maya had heard the sincerity in Malcolm's voice, had also seen the way Simone lowered her eyes like someone who had just realized she had made another person prove something that should never have needed proving. But this cake was not a reward for someone who had endured enough hardship. It was a promise she had quietly kept for 5 months, and that promise would change meaning if it were fulfilled with someone else's money. "I thank you," Maya said. "But I want to pay." She did not explain further. Her fingers still rested on the lid of the jar, right where the words "Mother's Birthday" had faded from being touched by her hand so many times. There were nights Maya opened the jar only to recount, then close the lid, unable to add a single coin. There were weeks the entire surplus had to go toward medicine or the electric bill. At those times, she had thought she would not make it in time. But every morning, watching her mother sit by the window, carefully writing down medication times and handwriting growing smaller each day, Maya kept going. Malcolm did not repeat his offer. He looked at her a moment longer, with the attention of someone who had just realized the thing in front of him could not be valued in the ordinary way. He had met people who refused help out of pride, and also people who accepted everything without ever looking back. Maya belonged to neither side. She was only protecting her right to do this for her mother herself. He turned to Simone and instructed the store to accept exactly $384. Tessa began gathering the money on the tray. She arranged each bill by denomination, stacked the coins into small columns, then set the remaining $7 aside. No one rushed her hands. Malcolm stood still. Simone personally checked the cake, removed the card marking the unconfirmed pre-order, and called into the kitchen area to request the wording Maya had brought be written on it. While waiting, Maya took out her phone to check the time. She had 1 hour and 40 minutes left before she had to be at the pharmacy. If she left the store within the next 15 minutes, she still had enough time to bring the cake home, hide it in Mrs. Lewis's refrigerator next door, then change and go to work. Ruth believed that tonight the two of them would just eat the leftover soup from the day before. Maya had tried to keep everything so normal that this morning she had even asked her mother if she wanted more bread on the way home. Tessa pushed the $7 back toward her. Maya folded the $5 bill and the $1 bill, put them into the small pocket of her bag. The 4 quarters she held in her palm for a moment before putting them away. Simone watched that gesture and understood her apology could not turn back time. But at least she could stop making Maya feel that keeping that small amount was something to hide. Malcolm looked at the piece of paper placed beside the box of candles. The words were written in blue pen, tilted slightly to the right. "Happy birthday, Mother Ruth." The first time just for Mother. "How old is she?" he asked. 62. The number made Malcolm pause briefly. just enough for an old memory to touch a place he had thought long closed. He read Ruth's name again, slower than before. In more than 30 years of building his company, he had met hundreds of people with that name, but none of them came paired with the smell of cornbread, brown folding chairs, and a low-ceilinged kitchen beneath New Hope Church. He asked her last name. Ellis. The coffee cup on the counter was still warm at the bottom, but Malcolm's hand had left it. He looked at Maya closely for the first time. Her face did not resemble Ruth's in any obvious way. The Ruth in his memory had fuller cheeks, often tied a scarf around her hair, and always stood slightly tilted when listening to children speak, as if wanting to give them her full attention. But Maya held her gaze still in the same way, not avoiding, not pressing, just waiting for the person across from her to decide for themselves how honest they would be. "What was your father's name?" The question made Maya grip the strap of her bag a little tighter. Wariness returned immediately. This man, knowing her mother's name, was not yet enough for him to step further into their lives. Malcolm sensed that and did not press further. He simply stood on the other side of the counter, hands empty, waiting for her to decide whether to answer. "Daniel," Maya said after a moment. "Daniel Ellis." From the kitchen area came the sound of a mixer, then the sound of a metal tray being set down. But to Malcolm, those sounds receded far away. He remembered a man with large hands, who often wore gray work shirts and kept a wooden spoon burned at the handle. Daniel used to use that very spoon to tap lightly on the side of the bowl whenever Malcolm mixed the batter too fast. Maya bent down to check the box of candles. From the mouth of the bag, the old wooden spoon handle showed a section, its body marked with a burn curved like a crescent. Malcolm looked at it, then looked back at her. Was Miss Ruth in the New Hope basement? Maya did not answer right away. The way Malcolm named the church basement caught her attention, but not enough for her to trust him yet. New Hope had once served hundreds of families in the neighborhood. Anyone who grew up near Allegheny Avenue could know about the low windows level with the sidewalk and the concrete stairs leading down to the kitchen below. Maya had learned from her mother that memory could be a door, but not everyone who knocked with the right name should be invited inside. "Where do you know my mother from?" Malcolm looked at the wooden spoon showing from the bag, then slowly drew his gaze back to her face. He did not begin with his achievements, did not mention the stores, hotels, or the figures that had once appeared in newspapers. He spoke of the brown folding chairs in the New Hope basement. Their legs were often uneven because the concrete floor was not level, so Daniel kept a box of cardboard cut into small pieces to wedge underneath. The children in the neighborhood thought those cardboard pieces were trash. Daniel called them the thing that kept people able to sit down without wobbling. Maya lowered the box of candles. Malcolm said that on Thursday evenings at the end of each month, the kitchen always smelled of fried onions, cornmeal, and the cleaner used to wipe down the tables. His mother often arrived very late, after her shift, when most of the food trays were nearly empty. She did not want to stand in line. Not because she thought herself better than others, but because she feared someone in the neighborhood would realize the two of them did not have enough to eat. Malcolm was too young then to fully understand his mother's pride, but old enough to feel her hand tighten whenever someone glanced their way. Ruth never asked whether they needed help. She handed Malcolm a stack of paper towels, told him to wipe the tables, then asked him to stack the chairs against the wall. The task took only 10 minutes. When he finished, Ruth placed 2 containers of food in his hands and said that was the share for whoever had helped her close up the kitchen. She did it as if it were an ordinary exchange. Malcolm still remembered the feeling of carrying 2 containers of food up the stairs. He did not feel he was receiving charity. He felt he had just done something useful and was bringing wages home to his mother. Years later, once he could afford any dinner he wanted, Malcolm came to understand that Ruth had not simply given them food. She had protected something far more fragile than hunger. Maya looked at Simone and Tessa. Both had quietly stepped back toward the boxing area, leaving a space around the counter that no one had asked for. In the kitchen, the baker was still writing Ruth's name in yellow icing. Every movement behind the glass continued, but the sound of the store seemed to have been held at a different distance. "And my father?" Maya asked. Malcolm looked down at his own hands. He spoke of a rainy afternoon when Daniel had found him standing outside the kitchen door staring at the oven. Malcolm had read a simple cake recipe in an old church book, but had never had enough ingredients to try it. Daniel did not ask whether he knew how to bake. He simply set in front of him a bowl, an opened bag of flour, and the wooden spoon burned at the handle. The first batch came out nearly ruined. One side had caved in, the other edge burned black because the oven heated unevenly. Malcolm remembered standing in front of the tray, his face hotter than the oven door, wanting only to throw it in the trash before Daniel saw. But Daniel took a knife, cut away the burned part, divided the rest into 3 pieces, then ate the first piece while it was still too hot. He did not praise the cake for being good. He only said that a ruined dish had no right to decide the person who made it was worthless. That sentence stayed with Malcolm longer than any business lecture. It was there in his first rented kitchen, when he ruined 4 batches in one night. It was there when the bank turned down his loan, when his first store had only 3 customers all day, and when he had to choose between paying his employees or paying his own rent. Every time failure made him want to quit, Malcolm remembered Daniel sitting on the uneven folding chair, eating a burnt piece of cake as if the rest still deserved to be kept. Maya opened the bag and took out the spoon. The wooden handle had grown smooth from years of use. Near the end of the grip was a burn mark curved dark brown, shaped like a crescent. Malcolm did not reach out to touch it. He only looked at it, and for a few seconds, the man whose name sat atop a company worth billions of dollars was no longer standing in the middle of an elegant bakery. He was once again the boy waiting for Daniel to turn his back so he could sneak a bite of the crumbs still stuck to the tray. "My mother kept it after my father died," Maya said. Malcolm nodded. His breathing grew heavier, but his voice stayed low and clear. He said he had looked for Ruth twice. The first time, the church only said the Ellis family had moved out of their old apartment. The second time, the new person in charge no longer had records of the community meals from years before. Malcolm had assumed Ruth had left Philadelphia or simply did not want to be found. Behind them, the baker set the finished cake into the box. The yellow lettering sat in the middle of the ivory icing, straight and bright under the light. Malcolm looked at Maya. "Could I bring the cake home together with you?" Maya looked at the cake that had just been placed in the box, then looked at the man standing before her. 20 minutes earlier, he had been nothing more than a stranger who happened to walk into the store. Now, he knew the burn mark on her father's spoon, remembered the kitchen where her mother once cooked, and carried in his voice a piece of the past Maya herself had never been told. Still, a few accurate memories were not enough for her to immediately bring a stranger home. She thought of Ruth sitting by the window, perhaps already starting to watch the clock. In recent days, she often hid her fatigue by finding work for her hands, folding towels already folded, wiping a table that had no dust, rearranging spice jars in the order she had used for 20 years. If Maya brought Malcolm home without warning, Ruth would not like it. But if the story he had just told was true, refusing him could mean closing a door that had taken more than 30 years to find its way back. "You can come along," Maya said. "But my mother decides whether she wants to talk or not." Malcolm nodded. He did not thank her too quickly, nor did he show a relief that would make Maya responsible for his feelings. He only lifted the coffee cup off the counter, then set it down again upon realizing his hand was no longer as steady as before. Simone turned away to check the cake box, giving him that small measure of privacy. The cake was secured with a thick baseboard and 4 wedges at the corners. Tessa tied string around the box twice, then lined the bottom with extra paper so the icing would not tilt when the car turned. She handed Maya the receipt along with the $7 in change, with no coupon or offer of compensation attached. For the first time since walking into the store, Maya felt her transaction had been completed exactly as she had asked. Simone stood by the counter as Maya prepared to leave. She apologized once more, brief, and without trying to explain that she had only been following policy. Maya looked at the woman who had spent nearly the past half hour coming to recognize a mistake that had not come from malice but could still hurt someone. She nodded. Forgiveness did not need to be named right there in that room. Sometimes the kindest thing a person can do after a mistake is to remember the feeling of that moment long enough not to repeat it with the next person. Malcolm carried the cake box himself. Maya did not compete for the task, but she kept the jar and the bag of candles. They left Grant and Bloom through the glass door, stepping onto the sidewalk where the flow of people passed by without knowing a man had just found the name of his benefactor on a slip of paper set beside 62 candles. Malcolm's car waited nearby. It was elegant but not showy, the back seat wide enough for the cake to sit steadily between the two of them. Maya sent a message to her pharmacy manager, asking to come in late and accepting she would lose the pay for that stretch of time. She did not give a reason, A story more than 30 years long could not be explained in a text box meant for shift changes. The car headed north. The tall buildings of Center City receded behind the window glass, giving way to rows of brick houses standing close together, hair salons with old signs, corner stores keeping crates of soda out on the stoop, and front steps where old people sat catching the last bit of daylight. Malcolm looked at each corner like someone rereading a letter he had once known by heart but had not opened in far too long. Maya said her mother still cooked more than the two of them needed. A pot of soup meant for 3 meals would always turn into 4 containers, because Ruth believed there was always someone in the neighborhood who had not managed to cook dinner. Mrs. Lewis next door had joint pain. The mail carrier often ran late during the holidays. A family newly moved in at the end of the row was not yet used to the bus routes and often got home after the nearby store had closed. Ruth never called those portions help. She only said food kept too long would lose its taste. Malcolm looked out the window. He remembered the aluminum containers with their edges folded carefully, the sauce never once leaking into the paper bag. As a child, he had once thought Ruth simply had too much food. Only much later did he understand she had exactly as much more than others as the amount she chose not to keep for herself. A hungry person doesn't only remember the meal they ate, he said. They remember whether they had to bow their head to receive it. After that sentence, the two of them fell silent. Maya thought of the years living with Ruth without ever hearing her mother mention Malcolm's name. She had held hundreds of other people's stories inside her without ever using them to prove her own goodness. Perhaps that was why Malcolm remembered her so clearly. Kindness that does not ask the recipient to come back is often the hardest kind to forget. The car passed New Hope Church. The outer wall had been repainted. The stairs now had a metal handrail, and a new sign covered most of the basement's low window. Malcolm leaned to look until the building disappeared behind a row of trees. For a moment, he saw the boy from years ago carrying a stack of chairs too tall to see over, able only to watch Daniel's shoes ahead of him to know which way to go. When the car stopped in front of Maya's rented house, the living room light was already on. She took out her keys, told Malcolm to wait on the porch while she went in first. But the cake box was too large to hide, and Ruth had already heard the car stop from inside. The moment Maya opened the door, her mother's voice carried out from the chair by the window. "What did you buy that needs both hands to carry in like that?" Maya had just managed to bring a hand to support the bottom of the box when Malcolm stepped over the threshold. Ruth was sitting in the chair by the window, a thin blanket draped over her knees and her reading glasses still on the bridge of her nose. She looked at the cake first, her brows furrowing out of the habit of someone who always believed her daughter spent too much on her. Then her gaze shifted to the man standing behind Maya. The room went quiet. Ruth did not stand up. In recent days, she had learned not to let her emotions move her body faster than it could manage. But the hand resting on her medication notebook tightened slightly, and eyes usually tired suddenly brightened, as if recognizing a face that had wandered lost in her memory for far too long. "Little Mal?" Malcolm stopped in the middle of the room. No one at shareholder meetings, none of the thousands of employees working for him, no newspaper had ever known that name. His mother had stopped using it once he went to college. Most of the people who had known that boy had moved away, grown old and frail, or lost touch. But Ruth needed only to look at the area around his temples and the way he stood slightly tilted when moved to recognize the child who once carried folding chairs in the church basement. Malcolm set the cake box down on the table. He walked toward Ruth, then knelt down, slowly enough not to startle her. It was not the gesture of a billionaire wanting to prove his humility. It was simply that his legs no longer had the strength to hold his body upright when the woman he had searched for more than 30 years was right in front of him. Ruth reached out and touched his cheek. Her fingers were thinner than in memory, but their warmth was the same. She looked at him for a long while, as if comparing the man before her with the boy who always tried to hide his hunger by drinking more water. "You have your mother's eyes," she said. Malcolm bowed his head. He had rehearsed this "thank you" many times in his imagination. In the car, in hotel rooms, on sleepless nights after every failed search. But now, actually sitting before Ruth, every prepared word felt far too polished. He spoke of the evenings at the end of each month, when his mother came home from work with swollen feet and a wallet nearly empty. He described how Ruth never asked if they were hungry, because that question would have forced his mother to admit what she was trying to hide. She simply gave Malcolm a task to do, then handed over 2 portions of food as if it were an ordinary exchange of labor. After each of those returns home, Malcolm's mother would sit at the kitchen table for a long while. She cried out of relief just to be able to breathe. because that night, her son would go to sleep with a full stomach and she would not have to choose between the electric bill and food. Malcolm thanked Ruth for having treated them like neighbors, not like a pitiable circumstance. He thanked Daniel for letting him stand in front of the old oven, for eating the burnt piece of cake without laughing, and for saying once that a single failure had no right to decide a person's worth. Ruth listened without interrupting. She only kept her hand on his shoulder, nodding faintly now and then when a memory was named correctly. When Malcolm finished speaking, she exhaled slowly, as if the story were not some great debt but simply an old box someone had just set back in its proper place. "You two need dinner," she said. "I'll just cook a little more." Malcolm looked up. There was no false modesty in Ruth's voice. She truly believed everything was that simple. A hungry child, a kitchen with food left, an adult who could do something about it. "For a child," he said, "sometimes a dinner is the reason to believe tomorrow still has a place for them." Ruth's gaze shifted to the cake box, then to Maya. Perhaps it was only then that she realized her daughter had brought both pieces of the past home at the same time. A man she had once fed, and the gift she had never let anyone buy for her. Maya set the jar down on the table, then bent to adjust the blanket over her mother's knees. At close distance, Malcolm saw the blood pressure monitor on the small table, the medicine bottles sorted by day, and a folded appointment slip beside a glass of water. Maya explained her mother had had high blood pressure for many years and was being monitored for risk of heart failure. Some weeks Ruth was well enough to walk to church on her own. Some days just bathing and getting dressed left her needing to sit and rest. The hardest part was the dozens of small pieces that had to line up together. Doctors' schedules, Maya's shifts, bus rides, prescription refills, and records scattered across different clinics. At the pharmacy, Maya had once read on a CDC page updated June 2, 2026 that 59.6% of non-Hispanic Black adults have hypertension. Among those recommended to take medication, only 31.8% have their blood pressure under control. To her, those figures did not live on paper. They lived in every time Ruth said she wasn't dizzy, so her daughter wouldn't skip a shift, in the pills counted out before payday, and in the fear whenever the phone rang during clinic hours. Malcolm kept his phone in his pocket and only asked what was making things hardest for the two of them to manage. Maya looked at her mother before answering. She said they needed a doctor who could provide stable, ongoing care, someone to help connect records currently sitting in 3 different places, and an appointment schedule that didn't force her to choose between caring for her mother and keeping her job. Ruth still had insurance. They didn't need to be rescued from their whole life. They needed the system to stop making them find their own way through it while already exhausted. Ruth looked at Malcolm for a long moment. Her hand still rested on his shoulder, but her voice had turned more serious, the same tone she once used to ask the children in the basement whether they had finished their part of the work. "Have you built a place yet where someone who needs help doesn't have to bow their head?" Malcolm did not answer right away. Ruth's question gave him no room to hide behind numbers. The stores in Philadelphia were only the smallest part of the food and hotel system he had built across many states. Thousands of employees, charitable funds with names engraved on brass plaques, and photos of handshakes at fundraising events could all be brought out as evidence. But Ruth was not asking how much he had given. She was asking whether the people who needed help had to bow their heads. Malcolm thought of Maya standing at the cake counter, having to open the jar in front of strangers to prove she could afford a gift. He thought of Simone, someone not cruel but who had let procedure speak in place of listening. That store carried his name. The silence in it carried his name too. "Not enough yet," Malcolm said. Ruth nodded, neither disappointed nor consoling. She received the answer the way she once received a boy's burnt cakes, not turning a mistake into a verdict, but not pretending the burnt part did not exist either. Her hand left Malcolm's shoulder, then returned to rest on the blanket. Fatigue showed more clearly now around her mouth, but her eyes remained calm. Maya pulled the cake box closer to the table. She untied the string very slowly, holding each knot so as not to shake the icing inside. When the lid was lifted, the small room suddenly brightened with the ivory-colored icing and the thin gold border around the base of the cake. In the very center was Ruth's name, larger than every other word. "Happy birthday, Mother Ruth." The first time just for Mother. Ruth looked at the words for a long while. She had once written the names of hundreds of children on cakes using piping bags folded from wax paper by hand. She had remembered Jamal's nut allergy, Keisha's love of strawberries, the girl at the end of the row who could only eat soft cake because she was losing her teeth. Other people's names always sat in the center of a cake. Ruth's name usually only appeared on the back of a card, beneath wishes she had written for someone else. "Did you really buy this?" she asked. Maya set the jar down beside the cake box. Inside it, exactly $7 remained, 1 5, 1 1 and 4 quarters. She spoke of the 5 months of saving, but not in a way that turned herself into someone who had suffered. She only spoke of lunches brought from home, extra shifts and walks a little longer than usual. As she spoke, Ruth's gaze lowered further and further toward her daughter's worn soft shoes. She reached out and touched the jar. Her fingers stopped on the faded words on the lid. Maya had written "Mother's Birthday" with the same marker usually used to label medicine. The ink had smudged on the last letter from the one time she had held the jar with a still damp hand. "You shouldn't have done this," Ruth said. The sentence was very quiet, not a reproach. It was the reflex of someone who had lived too long stepping aside so the better share would belong to someone else. Maya opened the bag, took out the box of candles, then set it in front of her mother. "Today, don't decide for me." After that, she turned back to the cake. Maya began placing candles around the 3 low tiers of icing. 62 candles was more than she had imagined. They stood close together, white mixed with gold, their small wicks tilting in many directions. Malcolm helped her hold the candle box steady. Ruth sat watching the two of them work at the table that barely had room for 3 plates, a teapot and a sugar bowl chipped at the rim. Maya had bought the candles 2 weeks earlier. Every morning, opening the drawer for her watch, she saw them lying beneath a folded pair of socks. She had feared she would not save enough in time, feared the cake would be sold before she got there, feared a call from the clinic might turn the birthday into just another day. Some people look forward to a happy occasion with excitement. Maya looked forward to it with love tangled together with the fear that the thing she treasured most could always change before she managed to reach it. When the first candle was lit, Ruth raised a hand to cover her mouth. The flame spread slowly around the cake. 1, then 10, then nearly the whole tabletop covered in small points of light. The shadows of 3 people swayed on the wall behind them. Daniel's wooden spoon lay beside the cake box, its crescent-shaped burn catching the golden light like an old handprint that had never quite left the room. Ruth cried without making a sound. The tears moved down slowly, stopping in the creases around her mouth. She no longer looked at the cake for long. She looked at Maya. In that gaze were the nights Ruth had stayed awake, waiting for her daughter's shift to end, the mornings she had pretended to feel well so Maya could go to work, and the ache of a mother realizing her child had quietly cut down her own share in order to save for her. Maya crouched by the chair, wiping her mother's tears with her thumb the way Ruth once had for her as a child. "You haven't lost anything," Maya said. "I just wanted you to have one day without having to stand behind anyone." Ruth rested her forehead against her daughter's. The two of them stayed like that for a few seconds, long enough that Malcolm had to turn his face toward the window. Outside, a bus passed at the end of the street. The light inside it slid along the ceiling, then vanished. Maya helped her mother sit upright again. Ruth breathed in slowly, looked at the 62 flames trembling on the cake, then leaned down. She blew once. More than half the candles went out. On the second try, the ones near the edge of the cake flickered away, leaving thin threads of smoke rising up. Only one remained lit, in the center. Ruth drew a breath, but her fatigue made her stop. Maya did not blow it out for her. Neither did Malcolm. They waited, letting Ruth decide whether she wanted to try again. She looked at the last flame, then at the 2 people before her. A small smile appeared through the tears. "Come here," she said. Maya leaned in close beside her mother. Malcolm knelt down on the other side. The 3 of them breathed in together, and when the last candle went out, Malcolm's hand was still resting on the glass jar, right above the 7 remaining dollars, and the empty spaces tomorrow had not yet decided how to fill. Those empty spaces were not filled by Malcolm that very night with a check or an oversized promise. He stayed until Ruth had eaten a small slice of cake, taken her medicine on time, and grown tired enough that her eyelids closed more slowly than usual. Before leaving, he only asked Maya to write down 3 things making life hardest for her and her mother to manage. Not everything they had ever lacked, just 3 things that needed solving first. Maya used the back of the cake receipt. She wrote, "A cardiologist providing stable ongoing care, someone to help connect records from 3 clinics, and an appointment schedule that did not clash with the shifts she could not miss." She did not write down the rent, did not write down the heater that often knocked at night, did not write down the shoes that were hurting her heels whenever she stood too long. Those things were pressing, but Maya had grown used to distinguishing between what was merely uncomfortable and what could put her mother in real danger. Malcolm folded the paper and put it in his inner jacket pocket. He did not say everything would be fine. People living between bills and medication schedules had heard that line too many times from people who never bore the consequences when it turned out untrue. The next morning, Maya received a call during her lunch break. The woman on the line was named Evelyn Price, coordinator of the health fund the grant company had run for years. She did not say Malcolm had ordered them to take care of everything. She asked whether Maya would allow the fund to review Ruth's insurance records, then explained each step needed, which costs would be covered, and which would still have to be paid as usual. For the first time in months, Maya did not have to recount her mother's entire medical history from the beginning. Evelyn had already contacted the old clinic, obtained the medication list, and found a cardiologist 2 bus routes from their home. The appointment was scheduled for Friday afternoon, after Maya's main job and before her evening shift at the pharmacy. Upon hearing that, Maya sat still in front of the vending machine in the office hallway, phone still in hand but unable to say anything. What nearly brought her to tears was not the doctor's name or the new clinic. It was the fact that a stranger had looked at the shape of her daily life before choosing the appointment time. Ruth objected when she learned the fund would cover the remaining cost. She asked what she had to do to pay it back. Evelyn did not tell her simply to be grateful. 3 days later, Malcolm sent over a 2-page job description. Ruth was invited to serve as an advisor for the community meal program the company was expanding in Philadelphia. The work was up to 8 hours a week, mostly doable from home. She would review menus, give input on how food was distributed, and guide staff on avoiding turning recipients into subjects in promotional photos. Ruth read the description twice. She corrected 3 places with a red pen. She crossed out the phrase beneficiary and replaced it with person coming to receive a meal. She required the program to always keep a table set aside for elderly guests. At the bottom of the page, she wrote that no one should have to recount their circumstances in front of a crowded room just to bring food home. Malcolm accepted all 3 revisions. For Maya, the offer came more slowly. He did not hand her a title out of gratitude to her family. Human Resources sent a real position, complete with requirements, salary, benefits, and a probation period. The community relations role needed someone who understood insurance records, pharmacy procedures, and how small bureaucratic steps could make a family give up before ever receiving help. Maya read every line carefully. She asked about hours, benefits, and responsibility if the program failed. She requested a day to think before agreeing to interview. Malcolm did not attend that interview. 3 weeks later, Maya took the job. Her first paycheck did not turn their home into somewhere else. Maya paid off the remaining electric bill, called a technician to check the heater, and set up regular medication delivery for Ruth. She cut back 2 evening shifts at the pharmacy instead of quitting outright, not yet wanting to depend fully on the new job before her probation period ended. After that, she bought a pair of black shoes with cushioned heels, good enough to stand in all day without her soles burning. She kept the old shoes in the closet for 1 more week. Ruth saw them and did not ask why. She only quietly placed a new pack of shoe inserts beside the shoebox, as if she understood her daughter was still not used to buying something just to ease her own body's pain. At Grant & Bloom, Simone offered to personally lead the review of the payment procedure. She was not fired. Malcolm asked her to stay long enough to fix what she had once gotten wrong. Tessa joined her, bringing along the same metal tray once used to count $391. Together, they built a new procedure. No guessing at someone's ability to pay based on clothing, no suggesting a cheaper item before the customer asked, and no making a customer paying in cash stand in the middle of the store as if explaining their circumstances. The first Friday afternoon after receiving her paycheck, Maya opened the glass jar. She took out the exact $7 still inside, put it in a white envelope, then wrote on the outside with the same black marker that had once written her mother's name on the lid. For someone only short 1 bus ride from where they need to be. She brought the envelope to the New Hope basement. Ruth was already sitting at the table at the back of the room. In front of her, the new program's first menu and a stack of SEPTA cards not yet handed out. When Maya set the envelope down, her mother did not open it. She only slid toward her daughter a list of 4 names, the first of them a woman who had missed 2 medical appointments for lack of bus fare, and the second someone standing out in the hallway, arms wrapped around a folder of medical records, not yet daring to step inside. The woman in the hallway was named Denise Carter. She was 56 years old, worked in the kitchen of an elementary school, and had grown used to putting her own needs at the bottom of the list. On 2 previous appointments, Denise had stood at the bus stop, looked at the money left in her wallet, then turned back home. She told the clinic she had been busy. The truth was, she did not have enough for both the trip and the medication she would need to pick up afterward. Maya did not call her name out from inside the room. She stepped into the hallway, sat down in the chair beside her, and placed the white envelope between them. She did not ask why Denise had missed her appointments. Did not ask her to explain what exactly she was short on. Maya only explained that inside the envelope was a SEPTA card and a small amount for whichever trip was most urgent. Denise looked at the basement door, where others were packing groceries into paper bags. She asked where she needed to sign. "Just write down the date you want to go," Maya said. After that, she handed Denise a pen. There was no camera, no one standing beside them recording the moment of the handoff. Denise wrote the appointment date on the corner of the envelope, folded it, then tucked it into her pocket as if putting away something that had belonged to her from the start. That was the first grant given by what would later be called the $7 Fund. The name led many people to assume each person received only $7. Maya did not correct it right away. She let them ask, then explained that $7 was what had been left over after Ruth's birthday cake. To a luxury store, it was an amount almost too small to matter. To someone standing between 2 bus rides, it could be the exact missing piece keeping them from where they needed to be. A year later, the New Hope basement no longer had the wobbling chairs from Malcolm's childhood. The floor had been repaired, the low windows had curtains added, and the old oven had been replaced with an energy-efficient model. But Ruth asked to keep one brown folding chair. She placed it beside the intake table, a piece of cardboard cut square wedged under its leg, exactly the way Daniel used to do it. The fund covered the small costs often overlooked by larger programs: medication copays, bus cards, record copying fees, a bag of groceries enough to last until payday. Every case still required the necessary paperwork, but no one had to stand in front of a crowd recounting the hardest part of their life to prove they deserved help. Malcolm provided the initial funding. He did not put his name on the wall, nor did he ask for the company logo to appear on the envelopes. When reporters asked about the program, he redirected the questions to Maya and Ruth. Ruth declined interviews. Maya only provided how to apply, the opening hours, and the list of things the fund could help with. Simone came in on 2 Saturday mornings each month. She usually sat at the front table, where newcomers would see her first. Tessa handled checking transit cards and logging how many envelopes were given out. The metal tray once used to count $391 now sat on a shelf, holding pens, paper clips, and coins people voluntarily left behind. Ruth worked fewer than 8 hours a week as her contract specified. Some days she could only sit for 40 minutes before needing to go home and rest. On stronger days, Ruth checked each grocery bag, making sure elderly recipients got containers that were easy to open and families traveling by bus were not given anything too heavy to carry. She still assigned small tasks to those who wanted to help. Someone folded paper towels. Someone else wrote labels. Someone watered the 2 plants by the window. Not in exchange for receiving aid, but so the room would not be too clearly divided between those who gave and those who received. Maya used her 6th paycheck to pay off the remaining medical bills. In the 7th month, she bought Ruth a chair with better back support but kept the old one by the window because her mother would not let it go. She still commuted by SEPTA most of the time. Her new black shoes now had a few creases at the toe, but her heels no longer bled after a long day standing. Malcolm sometimes came to New Hope without warning. He did not walk into the middle of the room like the founder of a corporation. He usually stood near the door, rolled up his sleeves, and carried boxes of food from the cart into storage. Ruth always found a task for him. Once she told him to wipe down a table that was already clean. Malcolm did it all over again without saying it was already clean. On the evening marking 1 year since the cake was bought, Maya came home after Ruth had already fallen asleep. The heating system ran steadily, no longer making the knocking sound that used to wake them both in the middle of the night. On the kitchen shelf, the glass jar sat beside Daniel's wooden spoon and the lid of the cake box, which Ruth had cleaned and pressed flat to keep her own name along with the words written in yellow icing. Maya opened the jar. There was no money inside anymore. Only the slip with the cake's price and a small piece of paper in Ruth's handwriting. She had written slowly, a few letters sloping downward from her tired hand. No one is too poor to give. No one is too rich to not need to be seen. From the next room, Ruth called her daughter's name. Her voice was still heavy with sleep, but clear. Maya set the paper back into the jar, walked through the living room, and saw her mother sitting up, one hand holding the blanket, the other pointing toward the table where 2 new envelopes sat, not yet addressed. "Someone needs to go early tomorrow," Ruth said. Maya pulled a chair over beside her mother, opened the $7 fund notebook, and picked up the pen. She wrote the first appointment date on the new page, then set the notebook down between them. Perhaps true kindness begins when a person is willing to look more closely at another's circumstances, willing to listen before judging, and helps without making the recipient feel small. Maya had saved every coin to buy her mother a cake. Ruth had once given out meals without asking anyone to remember. Malcolm carried that gratitude for more than 30 years, then came to understand that the best way to repay it was not to hand things out, but to build a place that let others keep their dignity. As for you, what in this story moved you the most? Was it the glass jar, the 62 candles, Ruth's question to Malcolm, or the way $7 became an opportunity for so many people? Share your feelings in the comments. Maybe you too were once helped by someone during a hard time, or once quietly did something small for a family member, a friend, or a complete stranger. Your story could become a comfort to someone who thinks their own kindness is too small to make a difference. Thank you for staying until the very last minutes. See you again in the next story, where kindnesses thought long forgotten are still finding their way back home.